They said it was nothing, a quirky habit, a leftover instinct, a phase maybe. After all, he was just a dog, retired from his service years, now living the quiet life among the elderly residents at Brookside Pines retirement home. But every single morning at exactly 6 a.m., Fang would walk past the kitchen doors, stop, lower his head, and growl. Not the kind of playful rumble dogs sometimes make. This was low, controlled, measured, the kind of sound that comes from something old and primal, something that knows danger when it's near. The first time, no one noticed. The second time, a nurse chuckled. The third time, people started asking questions. But no one had answers, because nothing ever looked wrong in the kitchen. Breakfast got served. Coffee brewed. Muffins came out warm and soft. Patients were fed. Staff rotated shifts. And yet every day, like clockwork, Fang growled at that same spot. Same time. Same door. Same deep suspicion in his eyes. He'd never acted this way before. Fang wasn't your average therapy dog. He had spent 8 years in the K-9 unit, trained to detect narcotics, illegal substances, even traces of explosives. He had chased fugitives through city streets, sniffed out danger in airport terminals, and saved lives with his nose more times than most cops could count. And now, at 12 years old, he had earned his retirement, though no one told him that. Because clearly, something inside him hadn't retired at all. Brookside Pines was the kind of place designed to make families feel less guilty about leaving their loved ones behind. It had soft lighting, homey decor, a fake fireplace that played crackling sounds, and a backyard garden where no one actually gardened. The staff were good, kind, mostly. Overworked like everyone else. But the residents? They loved Fang. They waited for him each morning as he made his rounds, tail wagging, tongue out, bumping his head gently into their legs, lying at their feet while they told stories no one else had time to hear, except at 6 a.m. At 6 a.m. he'd change. One of the orderlies joked that Fang had beef with the kitchen staff. Maybe they didn't give him a cookie one day, he laughed. But not everyone thought it was funny. "There's something he knows," said Mr. Harmon, an 89-year-old Korean war veteran with a pacemaker and a sharp tongue. "That dog isn't just growling for fun. Dogs don't play games like that." No one took him seriously. Not until weeks later, when things started going off. It began subtly. A few residents began skipping breakfast, said it tasted funny, bland, metallic, too soft, too mushy, like food that had been sitting out for too long. Staff brushed it off, said their taste buds were changing, part of aging. Then came the fatigue. Mrs. Keller, who used to walk laps around the common room with Fang every afternoon, started needing a walker. Mr. Jordan, once spry and loud, became sluggish and disoriented. Blood work came back inconclusive, no infections, no fevers, just normal deterioration, according to the nurse practitioner. But it wasn't normal. The cook, everyone called him Benny, had been there nearly 5 years. Friendly guy, tall, soft-spoken. He wore gloves, followed health codes, smiled at the patients. His meals weren't fancy, but they were edible. Yet somehow Fang didn't trust him. Or more specifically, didn't trust whatever was happening behind those stainless steel kitchen doors every morning. The administrator, Ms. Langley, called in a dog behaviorist. "Maybe he's triggered by the sound of the fridge kicking on," she suggested. "Could be the scent of cleaning products." The behaviorist watched Fang for 2 days. "He's alert," she said finally, "but not aggressive. If I didn't know better, I'd say he's detecting something specific. Not random noise, a smell." That made Langley nervous. She made a note, but didn't act. If you believe dogs can sense things we can't, and you want to hear more true and powerful stories of animal intuition, be sure to subscribe to Heroes for Animals, your home for stories of loyalty, courage, and justice with 4 paws. The morning everything changed, it was raining. The power had flickered overnight. The halls were darker than usual. A new batch of oatmeal was being served in plastic bowls. and Fang was already at his post, sitting in front of the kitchen, ears back, lips curled slightly. Then he did something he'd never done before. He barked. One sharp, explosive bark that made every staff member in the hallway freeze. "Fang!" someone shouted, but he didn't stop. He barked again. Louder, sharper, then turned, bolted down the hallway and stood in front of Mrs. Keller's room. He barked 3 more times. Then he ran back toward the kitchen and barked again. "Something's wrong," whispered the young volunteer Mia, who had been helping part-time during her nursing school break. "He's trying to tell us something." Mia had always liked Fang. She had seen him calm down panic attacks, soothe restless hands, even stop one resident from choking on applesauce just by alerting the nurse in time. She trusted his instincts more than most of the staff. That night she stayed late. She waited until Benny left, claiming he had to run an errand. Then she quietly slipped into the kitchen with her phone's flashlight. Everything looked normal. She opened drawers, checked the food storage room, looked inside the fridge. Then she saw it, a small unlabeled plastic bottle sitting in the back corner of the pantry, tucked behind the powdered eggs. The liquid inside was pale and viscous, like watered-down syrup. It smelled faintly of bleach, and something else she couldn't place. The label had been scratched off. She brought it to her uncle, a retired food safety inspector, the next day. He took one look and said, "Where did you get this?" "It was being used in the nursing home kitchen," Mia answered. His face darkened. "This is an industrial-grade meat tenderizer. It's banned in food for vulnerable populations, can cause serious damage to the liver over time. What the hell are they doing?" The truth hit like a punch to the gut. Benny had been using it in the morning food prep, mixing it in small amounts into meat and grain dishes. He claimed it made food easier to chew, but he knew it was wrong. He had ordered the product from an unregulated supplier, paid cash, and kept it off the books. He thought no one would notice, and no one did, except for the dog. Fang had smelled it. Maybe not the exact chemical, but the wrongness of it, the violation, the unseen threat, just like he had in crime scenes years ago. Every morning at 6 a.m., the cook would mix a few drops in with the ground beef or chicken stock, and every morning Fang would growl, not out of instinct, but because he was trying to warn the people who couldn't protect themselves. The bottle was confiscated. The authorities were called. Benny was arrested for reckless endangerment and unlawful distribution of banned substances. The residents, those who had suffered quietly, confused and tired, slowly began to recover. And Fang? He never growled at the kitchen door again. Instead, each morning at 6 a.m., he walked right past. It wagged his tail and stopped in front of Mia, waiting for his breakfast cookie. The kitchen at Brookside Pines had never been quieter. After Benny's arrest, the stainless steel counters gleamed like confession booths, empty of their usual bustle. No scent of scrambled eggs, no clatter of utensils. Just a dull silence broken only by the hum of the walk-in fridge and the soft footsteps of temporary staff brought in by the county. It was the first time in 5 years that the residents didn't have the familiar smell of oatmeal waiting for them when they woke up. But oddly, no one complained. In fact, most of them were too stunned to say much of anything. They had trusted Benny. He'd smiled. He'd brought extra pudding cups. He'd asked about their grandkids. He'd looked like every normal, unremarkable, middle-aged man you'd meet at a church potluck or grocery store, and he'd poisoned them, slowly, quietly, without remorse. Mia sat with Fang in the garden the next morning, letting the dew soak into her sneakers as she scratched behind his ears. He leaned against her thigh, content. "You knew," she said quietly, "before any of us." Fang blinked up at her, his face calm now. Peaceful even. Mia had spent most of the night fielding phone calls, from the sheriff's office, from her uncle at the Food Safety Bureau, even from a local news reporter who had caught wind of the story through police radio. By 9 a.m., the media vans were parked out front, their satellite dishes spinning like strange metal flowers. A man in a polo shirt with a news badge asked to interview Fang. Mia declined. Not because she was afraid, but because she knew this wasn't about spotlight. It was about reckoning. And maybe, just maybe, about listening to the animals we too often ignore. The investigation moved fast, faster than anyone expected. The food samples were tested. Residual traces of the illegal meat tenderizer, technically a modified proteolytic enzyme, were found in at least 4 batches of morning meals over the past 3 weeks. One sample dated back even further, according to records Mia helped pull, from the trash. The Department of Health stepped in. So did Adult Protective Services. Brookside Pines wasn't shut down, but it came dangerously close. Ms. Langley, the administrator, was placed on leave pending review of her oversight failures. And Fang? Fang became more than just a dog. He became a witness. The sheriff's office asked for a formal evaluation of Fang's behavior logs and training history. They wanted to understand how a dog could have picked up on something so subtle, and insisted on it for weeks. Mia, who had started compiling daily notes on Fang's movements out of pure curiosity, suddenly became the center of attention. She showed them the timestamps. "Look," she said, scrolling through her notebook. "He starts growling right after Benny unlocks the prep area. Like, within seconds, even before food is actually cooked." The sheriff nodded. That dog was reacting to the presence of the chemical, not the food, which means he's either the most sensitive therapy dog on Earth, or there's something else we haven't uncovered. As word spread, a retired police sergeant came forward. He had worked with Fang during his active canine years and remembered something crucial. Fang assisted in a food tampering case back in 2017, he said. A shady deli in Akron. Same type of chemical, I think. Might have imprinted on the smell. That changed everything. It explained why Fang had reacted so specifically, why he hadn't barked at other times, or at other people. His nose remembered. And more importantly, his instincts never turned off. Once a protector, always a protector. Residents began visiting Fang more often. Not just to pet him, but to thank him. Some brought him scraps of turkey. One woman knitted him a red scarf that said "Good boy" in white yarn. Mr. Harmon, the veteran, taped a handwritten medal to his collar made of tin foil and an old pill, bottle cap. "You earned your stripes, soldier," he said with a nod. Mia watched all of it with quiet awe. "I think he's the only one who actually listened to us," Mrs. Keller whispered one day, stroking Fang's head. "Doctors think we're senile, nurses don't have time, but that dog knew we weren't crazy." It wasn't just sentiment. Medical records began to support what residents had claimed. Several patients showed mild to moderate liver stress, consistent with low-dose chemical exposure over weeks. Their families, horrified and heartbroken, were considering legal action. But even amid all the noise and chaos, Fang remained steady. He didn't care about lawsuits or media stories. He cared about patrol, and every morning at 6 a.m., he walked the halls as if nothing had changed. Brookside Pines hired a new chef a week later, a woman named Gloria with 30 years in senior care dining. She cooked fresh. She used local produce. She fed the residents like they were family. Fang didn't growl at her once. One afternoon, a small ceremony was held in the courtyard. The sheriff's office brought Fang a blue ribbon and a plaque that read, "To Fang for service beyond words." A local news anchor filmed the moment. When she asked Mia how it felt to work alongside a hero dog, she smiled and said, "It's not work when someone saves lives with a growl." The clip went viral. Within 48 hours, Heroes for Animals featured Fang's story in a special segment. Messages poured in from across the country. Veterans, nurses, animal lovers, even retired cops who had worked with Fang in the past. One message stood out. It was from a woman in Colorado who wrote, "My mother passed in a home where something felt wrong, but we were told it was dementia. Now I wonder, what if she'd had a dog like Fang?" Mia read it twice and sat in silence for a long time. The story didn't end there. Fang was invited to visit 2 other care homes as a therapy guest. At both places, he was adored. But Mia noticed something else. When he walked past those kitchens, he didn't flinch, no growl, no bark, just wagged his tail and moved on. Whatever had been happening at Brookside Pines, it wasn't happening elsewhere, and that brought her peace. 6 months later, Mia was accepted into nursing school with a full scholarship. Her entrance essay, titled, "The Day a Dog Taught Me What the System Forgot." Fang's photo hung above her desk. He had reminded her that care isn't about forms and checklists, it's about paying attention. And sometimes the most reliable voices come without words. She still visited Brookside Pines every weekend. The residents joked she and Fang were a package deal. They weren't wrong, because Fang had saved more than lives. He had saved belief. In intuition, in loyalty, in the idea that even in the quiet corners of forgotten places, heroes walk on 4 legs, and some growl, right on time. Brookside Pines was quieter now. Not in a somber way, but in the kind of way that comes after a long-held breath is finally released. Residents smiled more. The staff seemed more alert. The coffee was stronger and breakfast actually tasted like breakfast. And Fang? Fang was still on duty. Each morning at 6 a.m. he made his rounds, down the east hallway past the nurse's station, a pause in the common room, a check near the kitchen, no more growling, and then a visit to his favorite patient, Mr. Harmon, who had started sneaking him little strips of bacon under the table. Everything seemed fine, until a storm rolled in. It was one of those spring storms that hits Ohio like a freight train. Thunder, flickering lights, trees leaning sideways in the wind. The kind of storm that sends everyone indoors and makes the building hum with backup generators and quiet tension. Around 2 a.m., a loud crack split the sky, followed by a sudden crash somewhere near the west wing. Mia was asleep in the staff lounge when the emergency lights came on. By the time she got her shoes on, Fang was already up, ears perked, tail stiff, eyes focused like a soldier mid-mission. "What is it, boy?" she asked, following him as he trotted, then sprinted toward the west hallway. A large tree branch had slammed against an outside wall, exposing a section of the building's exterior, specifically, an old maintenance room no one had used in years or so, they thought. The storm had knocked part of the siding loose. Behind it, Mia and Fang found a warped wooden door, bolted shut but clearly aged from moisture and neglect. Paint was peeling. Rust curled around the hinges. Mia called for maintenance, who arrived with tools and a flashlight. Within minutes, they had the door open, and what they found inside was strange. The room was small, dusty, lined with empty shelves, a forgotten mop bucket in one corner, but what drew everyone's attention was a locked metal cabinet against the back wall. It was old, probably 1960s era, and secured with a thick padlock that had fused with rust. Fang stood rigid in front of it, nose twitching. The next morning, after the storm passed, the administrator, a new interim director brought in during Ms. Langley's suspension, authorized the removal of the lock. Inside were 3 old file boxes, tightly sealed and labeled in faded ink. Meal logs, 1993-1997. Resident discharges, do not file. Archived correspondence, private. The room had been sealed for nearly 25 years. It didn't take long for the discovery to spark questions. Why were discharge records hidden here instead of stored digitally with the others? Why had the files been labeled do not file in the first place? And what was in that box of private correspondence? A small team from the county health department was called in to review the contents. Mia, now considered a trusted staff liaison, was allowed to observe. What they found inside wasn't criminal, but it was deeply unsettling. Dozens of letters, all handwritten. All from former staff and even a few family members, dated back to the early to mid-1990s. Many of them mentioned strange side effects after meals, residents showing signs of rapid decline, or suspicion of unethical testing. But the most damning documents were internal memos, typed on old Brookside Pines letterhead. A handful of them referred to something called Nutritional Enzyme Trial Protocol B. Notes indicated a short-term contract with a now-defunct pharmaceutical company, testing digestion aids in elderly patients with implied consent. Implied consent. No signatures. No disclosures, just quiet experimentation, tucked away under the guise of improved care. Mia felt sick. It wasn't just that something unethical had happened decades ago. It was that no one had been held accountable. The records had been hidden, not destroyed, as if someone once wanted the truth remembered, but not discovered too soon. When she told Mr. Harmon about it later that day, he just nodded slowly. I remember the year old Louis started coughing. Up blood, he said. They said it was pneumonia, but he was fine the day before, and then he just went. The discovery changed everything. The news broke again, another wave of media attention. But this time, it wasn't about one cook and a dog. It was about history, about what institutions get away with when no one's watching, or when those watching are too old to be heard. And it all circled back again to Fang, because if the storm hadn't hit, if the wall hadn't cracked, if Fang hadn't led Mia straight to the hidden room, the records might have stayed buried for another 20 years. That kind of timing isn't coincidence. Not in this story. Mia began looking at Fang differently. Not just as a hero dog, but as a bridge. He had lived through systems that demanded obedience. He'd been trained to sniff out the wrong in the world and sit silently beside it until someone noticed. But at Brookside Pines, where silence was common and complaints were chalked up to senility, Fang had done the one thing that couldn't be ignored. He'd stayed still and growled over and over until they listened. A state senator visited the facility a few weeks later. She posed for pictures with Fang, then held a short press conference in the courtyard. We are introducing new legislation to protect residents in long-term care facilities, she said. It will include mandatory external audits of historical records and stricter vetting of experimental food products used in these settings. They were calling it Fang's Law. Meanwhile, Mia started receiving emails from other care homes asking about therapy dog programs. Some just wanted to meet Fang. Others wanted help building their own teams of animal-based observers. It seemed simple. If you can't trust the paperwork or the people, maybe you can trust the dog. She and Fang visited a facility 2 towns over that had lost 3 patients in 1 month under sudden deterioration. Fang sniffed every corner, every room. He didn't growl once. Mia smiled with relief, but on the drive home, something nagged at her. Not fear, not anxiety, just a feeling that maybe this wasn't over. Fang hadn't barked again, but he hadn't forgotten either. Because some stories don't end with applause. Some keep digging. Sometimes justice comes in waves, not all at once. Brookside Pines had changed. New policies were put in place. Gloria, the new head chef, made food from scratch with ingredients people could pronounce. Family members visited more often now. There was a sense of safety again, a fragile but hopeful return to normalcy. But Mia couldn't rest. Not after what they'd found in that locked cabinet. Not after the words implied consent echoed in her head every night before sleep. Those files weren't just old records. They were scars. Paper-thin evidence of silent suffering, quietly tucked away by people who never expected to be caught. And Fang was restless again. He still wagged his tail for residents. He still loved bacon strips from Mr. Harmon. But something about his gaze had shifted, like he knew there was still something buried that no one had found. So Mia started digging. She began with the name stamped on the old Brookside Pines memos. Nuvox Nutritionals Inc. A quick search told her the company didn't exist anymore. It had folded in the early 2000s. But Nuvox wasn't a small-town operation. It had once been part of a much larger corporate web. Mia pulled her laptop closer and followed the paper trail. Nuvox had been a subsidiary of Stratwell Group, a Chicago-based pharmaceutical conglomerate known for its aggressive acquisitions and rapid-fire product development in the 1980s and 90s. Stratwell had quietly discontinued several digestive health projects around 1998. One of them was something called Trial Protocol B. It was a rabbit hole. Every time Mia clicked a link, 3 more questions popped up. And through it all, Fang sat nearby watching her, sometimes nosing her hand off the trackpad as if to say, "Slow down, But she couldn't slow down. She found archived business filings, lawsuit dockets, old patent applications that matched, chemical compounds similar to the meat tenderizing enzyme Benny had used. And then she hit something big, a 1996 lawsuit, sealed and never reopened, brought against Nuvox by a former employee named Travis M. Callan, filed in Ohio, filed from the exact same county Brookside Pines stood in. She couldn't find the full complaint. It had been settled out of court and sealed. But she found Callan's last known address and a phone number that was still attached to his name. She stared at the screen for 10 minutes before dialing. The voice that answered was hoarse, suspicious. "Hello? Mr. Callan? My name is Mia Parker. I work at Brookside Pines. I believe you may have information about something that happened here in the mid-90s. Silence. Then, that place still open? Yes, sir. But a lot's changed. We recently uncovered some files connected to your former employer, Nuvox. More silence. A long exhale. I swore I'd never talk about that again, he said. But maybe I was wrong. They met at a diner off the freeway. Callan was older now, walking with a limp and dressed in layers despite the warm weather. He brought a single manila folder and a tiny photo album he wouldn't let out of his hands. I was in R&D, he explained, stirring black coffee with a plastic spoon. We were testing digestion aids that could dissolve tough proteins faster, meat mostly. But they wanted to see if it could work in soft food too, stuff for the elderly. Mia leaned in. Brookside Pines? He nodded. We had a doctor there, who agreed to run a field test. Said most of the patients wouldn't even notice. Some were on puree diets already. We started small, but within 6 months we were seeing signs. Ulcers, enzyme overload, liver stress. I told them to stop. They didn't. He paused and looked at Fang, who sat beside Mia's booth like a quiet sentinel. They said it was harmless, that the patients were old and declining anyway. And when I pushed harder, they offered me hush money. You filed a lawsuit. I filed a warning, he corrected. But my lawyer took the deal behind my back. I never even saw a courtroom. Mia asked if he had any documents left. He slid the manila folder across the table. Inside were 3 copies of a typed report, dated February 1997, outlining internal concerns about adverse effects in patients with reduced kidney and liver function. 1 page had notes in the margins signed with a red pen. No pattern, no liability. Back at Brookside Pines, Mia shared the folder with the investigators still reviewing the 1990s files. It sent shockwaves. With new evidence on the table, a state-level inquiry reopened the Callan case. Although criminal charges were unlikely after so many years, the pressure on Stratwell Group began to mount. Advocacy groups got involved. A class action suit was filed on behalf of affected families, both past and present. Brookside Pines made public apologies. A memorial plaque was installed in the front garden with these words, "To those who were never given a choice, may we always choose to remember." Through it all, Fang remained a constant presence. The residents called him the truth dog. Some said he had a soul that could see what others hid. Others just fed him more treats than their diets allowed. But Fang didn't care about credit. He cared about his people. And he wasn't done. One morning, as spring edged into summer, a letter arrived for Mia, handwritten, no return address. Inside was a short note. You don't know me, but I saw the news. I worked at another care home in Indiana where Nuvox ran something similar. I think I still have files. If you want the truth, come find me. But bring the dog. He'll know if I'm lying. Mia folded the letter slowly. She looked down at Fang, who lay sleeping at her feet, his chest rising and falling in that deep, contented rhythm she had come to love. But when she said his name, he opened his eyes, and in them she saw it again. That spark. That knowing. Whatever storm had passed. The sky wasn't clear yet, not even close. Mia had never driven to Indiana before. It wasn't that far, a 3-hour ride west from Brookside Pines, but the miles stretched longer when you didn't know what waited on the other end. especially when all you had was a handwritten letter and a feeling in your gut. Fang rode in the passenger seat like always, upright and alert. His ears twitched every time she hit a bump in the road, but otherwise, he sat still, eyes fixed on the horizon. It felt like he knew this was more than a field trip. It always felt that way with him. They left at sunrise, Mia gripping the wheel tighter than usual. She had told the interim administrator at Brookside she was taking a personal day, but she brought a portable recorder, a legal pad, and copies of the Nuvox documents in her bag, just in case. What kind of person writes a letter like that? She wondered. No name, just E. No explanation, just the promise of more hidden truth. But whoever they were, they had asked her to bring the dog, and Fang would not disappoint. They pulled into a small town outside Fort Wayne, the kind of place with one gas station, a diner that looked like it hadn't changed since 1954, and power lines that swayed when trucks passed. The address on the letter led to a run-down ranch, house at the edge of town. Weeds lined the gravel driveway. An American flag hung faded in the window. Before Mia even turned off the engine, Fang let out a low hum, not quite a growl, but not friendly either. He stared at the front door, his whole body tense. Mia reached over and scratched his head. Easy, buddy, we're just here to listen. The door opened slowly before she knocked. A tall woman stood in the frame, late 50s maybe, with sharp features and gray hair tied back in a frayed scrunchie. She wore jeans, work boots, and a flannel shirt that hung loose on her narrow frame. You're Mia, the woman said flatly. I am. And this is Fang, I know. Mia blinked. You wrote the letter? The woman gave a tight nod. Come inside, quickly. The house was dim and smelled faintly of dust and old paper. Boxes lined the living room, each labeled by hand. Patient files, correspondence, newsletters, logbooks. The woman didn't offer coffee or pleasantries. She just pointed to the couch. I was the floor supervisor at Pine Brook Home in Evansville, she said. That was one of the other trial sites for Nuvox. We didn't know it at first. They told us the supplement was USDA approved. What's your name? Mia asked gently. The woman hesitated. Eleanor Voss. Fang sat at her feet, watching, waiting. Eleanor reached down, cautiously let her fingers brush the top of his head. He didn't flinch. Good, she whispered. That means I can talk. Eleanor opened a box and pulled out a plastic binder. Inside were photocopied incident reports, logs of patient reactions, internal memos from upper management, even a few postcards from a Nuvox rep who had visited every month under the pretense of quality inspections. We lost 6 patients in 9 months, she said. None of them were over 80. All had shown improvement just before the trial started. Then nausea, fatigue, liver distress, cognitive slippage, death within weeks. Mia listened in horror. Did you report it? She asked. Eleanor nodded. I wrote letters, sent complaints. When I pushed harder, I got demoted. A week later, I found my car tires slashed. Got a pink slip in the mail and a warning not to talk. She poured a glass of water with shaking hands. I stayed quiet for years. Thought it was safer. But then I saw Fang on the news. Saw how he uncovered what the system ignored. I figured, if that dog can still trust the world after everything, maybe I can too. Mia spent hours going through the documents. Some of them directly referenced Brookside Pines, suggesting the trials were linked, run by the same field supervisor. She found charts showing how the enzyme supplement was being tweaked and renamed over time. It had gone through 5 different product names, none of which were ever approved by the FDA. They buried the science under bureaucracy, Eleanor said. But they can't bury everything, not if you shine a light in the right places. Fang barked once, short and sharp, startling both women. Eleanor froze. That's the sound he made when I lied to myself, she said. When I told myself it wasn't murder. Mia asked to scan every document. Eleanor agreed on one condition. If they exposed this, they'd have to do it right. No sensationalism, no clickbait headlines, just facts and names. Real ones. I want the families to know, she said. They deserve that much. Back in Ohio, the files triggered a domino effect. With evidence from a second trial site, the class action suit grew larger. A whistleblower hotline was launched and more former employees came forward. A local university's investigative journalism team joined the effort. Fang's role became central again, his instincts now considered instrumental in breaking the case open, but with fame came pressure. One morning, a thick manila envelope arrived at Mia's apartment. Inside was a cease and desist letter from Stratwell Group's legal team. They wanted everything stopped. All files returned, all stories pulled. The final line chilled her. Continuing this investigation may put you and your associates at personal and professional risk. Mia read the letter out loud in the garden at Brookside Pines. Fang sat next to her as always. "What do you think?" she asked him. He turned and looked toward the woods beyond the fence. His ears perked. He didn't growl. He stared, as if something else was coming. The next week, someone broke into Eleanor's house. They didn't take money or electronics, just files. Boxes of them, but not all, because Eleanor had kept one folder hidden, buried, in a false bottom of her freezer, wrapped in foil and marked fish. Inside, the names of 47 test subjects, some still alive. Some whose families had no idea they'd been part of a medical trial. Fang growled when Mia read the list, not because it was new, but because it was just the beginning. The names changed everything. When Mia unfolded that final sheet from Eleanor's freezer, a list of 47 individuals allegedly enrolled in Nuvox's hidden enzyme trial, she didn't just see patients. She saw people. People like Mrs. Keller, like Mr. Harmon. People who sat in wheelchairs under sun lamps. People who forgot birthdays, but remembered songs. People who had no idea they were ever part of anything but growing old quietly. That list was proof of something long suspected but never confirmed. Nuvox hadn't run one rogue trial. They'd run a network, a system built on silence and sealed records, and they'd done it by targeting the voiceless, people no one expected to ask questions. But they hadn't counted on Fang. Mia made photocopies. Then she made calls. Families were contacted. Some were shocked. Others were furious. A few wept. Most had buried loved ones years ago, never suspecting foul play. Some of the names on the list were still alive, residents living in care homes across the Midwest. With permission, Mia and a small group of volunteers began visiting them. At the second facility in Indiana, a woman named Virginia, 96 years old, blind in one eye, broke down in tears after hearing her name was on the list. "I always thought the nurses were giving me something extra," she whispered. "I felt strange, but no one ever listened, until now." Fang lay beside her, resting, his chin on her foot. "He listens," she said. "He always has." The media caught wind fast. A regional story exploded into national headlines. Canine dog helps uncover medical testing scandal in nursing homes. Talk shows picked it up. Health agencies scrambled for damage control. The Stratwell Group, after weeks of denial, issued a formal apology and entered settlement talks with the Department of Justice. But public opinion had already turned. Protesters marched outside Stratwell's corporate headquarters. Petitions were launched. Congressional hearings were scheduled. And quietly, behind the scenes, a bipartisan bill began moving through committee. They called it the Fang Act. The bill proposed mandatory transparency in all pharmaceutical partnerships with elder care facilities, third-party audits of all experimental drug use in vulnerable populations, and the creation of a federally funded Canine Sentinel program. It was the first piece of elder care legislation to ever be named after a dog. Back at Brookside Pines, change had come too. The walls were painted with softer colors. Fresh plants were brought into the common areas. Fang had a dedicated spot by the front entrance, a large dog bed with a brass plaque above it that read, Fang. He listened when no one else did. Mr. Harmon wheeled himself over one afternoon and placed a small American flag next to the plaque. "I served in Korea," he told a visiting reporter, "but this dog, he served here." For Mia, life moved fast. She finished nursing school with honors. She was offered a research position with a patient advocacy group. But she chose something else, something smaller, more personal. She returned to Brookside Pines not as a volunteer, not even as a nurse, but as director, the youngest in the facility's history, and she brought a new vision with her, one that combined clinical care with dignity, truth, and yes, dogs. Every new hire was trained not just in medicine but in listening, because sometimes change doesn't come from data. It comes from a growl in a hallway at 6 o'clock in the morning. One sunny Sunday, Mia and Fang sat in the back garden surrounded by residents and their families. A barbecue sizzled nearby. Kids ran across the lawn. The local high school jazz band played something cheerful and brassy under a white tent. A little boy, maybe 5, approached Mia shyly. "Is it true your dog saved a whole bunch of people?" he asked. Mia smiled. "He did." The boy looked at Fang wide-eyed. "He doesn't look like a superhero." Mia reached down and scratched Fang's ear. "Most of them don't." That night, as twilight settled over the facility, Mia sat alone with Fang on the front porch. She thought about everything they'd been through, the growls, the files, the long drives, and impossible choices. She looked down at him. "Thank you," she said softly. Fang licked her hand, then rested his head in her lap. Content at last. Some stories end with applause, some end with tears, but this one ends with a dog who never gave up, who stood watch when others looked away, who reminded us that the most powerful truths don't always come from people, but from presence, from knowing, from staying. Thank you for following Fang's journey from a quiet growl in the hallway to a legacy that changed lives. What do you think? Do you believe dogs can sense things we can't? Should therapy dogs be part of every nursing home in the country? Have you ever witnessed an animal warn you about danger or speak without words? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to Heroes for Animals for more true stories of loyalty, courage, and second chances.